generosity and courage that would enable other people to see our point of view as well. It is by cooperating only that our world can go forward. By attacking each other, either in words or with weapons or even with emotions, will not help us. Hate and fear are the main scourges of our world. All conflict arises either out of hate or out of fear. It is only by removing the sources of hate and fear that we shall be able to remove conflict from our country and from our world. As you know, there are many allegations and counter-allegations. I have not gone into any of them because it is not my purpose to promote and encourage conflict, whether of ideas or of arms, but to try to promote harmony and understanding. I hope you will understand us and join us in our endeavor. As I said earlier, this is a diplomatic briefing. This was intended to keep the members of our diplomatic community, the representatives of our friends from all over the world, in touch with what we are trying to do. But in some ways, it is more than just a diplomatic briefing. It is a friendly appeal to all those who wish Myanmar well, a friendly appeal to help us to achieve the ends that I think you would agree are desirable, not just for this particular country, but for countries all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency.
So Myanmar's de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi addressing the country on a televised address on the growing crisis in Rakhine State. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate has been heavily criticised for her near silence as 400,000 Rohingya have fled to Bangladesh amid violence, the latest violence sparked by an armed attack blamed on Rohingya militants on police posts in August. The security crackdown that followed by the military has been called ethnic cleansing by the United Nations. Aung San Suu Kyi saying, "We are concerned to hear the number of Muslims fleeing areas to Bangladesh, condemning any human rights violations that have been created because of the crisis." Our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head joins us now in Bangladesh, where many of the Rohingya have fled. Jonathan, condemnation, and she says she wants to take up the plan put to her to try and end the crisis, but one does wonder why it's taken her so long to say all of this.
Yes, one does wonder why she's been so silent, but the other thing is that even in this speech there's a kind of air of unreality. I mean, she didn't address at all the clear evidence of deliberate destruction of villages on a massive scale by the military and by Rakhine Buddhist communities with a clear tacit or active endorsement of the security forces. That was never even mentioned. She tried to stress the fact that 50% of Muslim communities have stayed inside Myanmar, and said, well, why don't the international community go and look at them and ask why they stayed? Some of those communities we know are absolutely terrified and want to leave and can't. You know, this really didn't address the real problems. She claims there were no clearance operations or clashes since the 5th of September. Well, I witnessed a village being burnt down on the 7th, and I can still been able to see villages being burnt right along the coast south of Mongdor from here, since I got here. Those clearance operations are obviously ongoing. You know, she's simply denying the reality of what's going on. She also claimed all people here have access to health and education. Well, Rohingya people have been denied access to that. They're not allowed to move. They can't leave their villages, and that's not recent. That's been going for the last 5 years, apart from the 140,000 or so who are confined to camps. So although this was an appeal for understanding and a talk about the long-term problems, which she clearly does want to address, and she has supported the Annan Commission, The reality on the ground now is one of the worst examples of forced movement of population in very violent circumstances that we've seen in recent times. And that just wasn't addressed. It was talking about all communities suffering, but no real acknowledgement of what has driven these Rohingyas in such awful conditions, bringing such terrible stories of human rights abuses.
And Jonathan, briefly, I was speaking to UNICEF yesterday, one of a number of organisations confirming they are sending large amounts of aid to the refugees in Bangladesh, but it's just not getting through. Do you think anything may change imminently there?
I'm sure it will change. This humanitarian operation has been unusually slow. Now, I know, we in the media always tend to rush aid agencies and ask within days, why isn't it here? It is difficult. They do need to establish safe and reliable ways to distribute assistance. And these people are not in official camps. They're distributed all over, camping in the middle of the trees alongside the woods. It does take time to scale up an operation like this. It is happening, but for political reasons, because the UN has been excluded from this Rohingya problem in the past by Bangladesh, it has been really unusually and probably unacceptably slow to get this humanitarian operation going.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Jonathan Head there for us on the Bangladeshi border, where many Rohingya have fled. And thanks for joining us here on BBC World News. Much more on Aung San Suu Kyi's national address on the plight of Rohingya Muslims fleeing what has been described as ethnic cleansing by the United Nations in Myanmar throughout the programme. Let's just bring you some more news now. And Hurricane Maria has strengthened to the maximum category 5 as it bears down on the Leeward Islands in the eastern Caribbean. Ferocious winds and heavy rain are expected to hit Dominica and the US and British Virgin Islands in the coming hours. Many Caribbean islands, of course, were already devastated earlier this month by Hurricane Irma. Let's get more now from Sarah Corker.
The French island of Martinique is being battered by strong winds, and this is just the start. Hurricane Maria is strengthening rapidly, packing winds of more than 200 kilometres an hour and bringing torrential rains. Residents on the east coast are being told to leave. And coming hot on the heels of Hurricane Irma, the Caribbean is braced for more fury and misery. On St Kitts, they're preparing for the worst.
We know that the winds are going to be quite strong and that we're expecting the seas to get up to the swell of around 20 feet. They're on high alert, as it were.
US forecasters say Maria is a potentially catastrophic hurricane. This is the predicted route. The island of Dominica, the first place to be hit, and then Maria is expected to move roughly along the same route as Hurricane Irma. The Prime Minister of Dominica took to Facebook as the powerful hurricane made landfall, writing, "The winds are merciless, we shall survive by the grace of God." Then, "My roof is gone, I'm at the complete mercy of the hurricane, house is flooding." Later he wrote, "I have been rescued." Many of these islands are still recovering from the devastation caused by Irma, a Category 5 hurricane which left at least 37 people dead. Drains are still blocked and forecasters are warning of life-threatening floods and mudslides. In the US Virgin Islands, people are battening down the hatches again.
Buildings, houses, businesses, everything is devastated.
Been here before, done it before, and we do it again.
I'm just desperate to get out of here, so I'm just trying to be as patient as possible, but it's hard not to give up.
Elsewhere in Puerto Rico, which escaped the worst 2 weeks ago, residents are stocking up on essentials as Maria is expected to intensify even further in the coming days. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
So how will the many Caribbean islands that have already been devastated earlier this month by Hurricane Irma cope? Jeremy Cook reports now from the British Virgin Islands.
It is a race against time. Battening down, shoring up, bracing for the storm to come. The fear, the forecast, is that Hurricane Maria is about to sweep through these already devastated islands. If Irma was the knockout punch, what's predicted next feels like a low blow.
I'm homeless.
For Francine, it's all too much.
Because all the shelters are full. And this is a devastation. You notice I have on different shoes. I can't find any clothes. You notice how I'm dressed. We really need help here because a lot of people are suffering.
Are you strong enough to take this again, another hurricane?
Well, no, but what can we do? Hope and pray. Sorry, Dad. It's terrible. We don't know what to do. I believe that as time go by, we got to face it.
We wish you all the best. Good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you so much.
The harsh reality here is that all the tons of debris can't be fixed down or made safe before the next hurricane is due to hit. The last thing these communities need. They've been doing their best to move these mountains of wreckage to the side of the roads to make some sort of sense of what is total chaos. But with winds now predicted to once again top 100 miles an hour, every piece of this wood and this plastic and these metal roofing sheets become potentially deadly airborne missiles. Adding to the problems here, the drains are clogged with debris. More flooding seems inevitable. Frightening times, aren't they, with this other hurricane coming in?
Yes, it is. Definitely. I am frightened. There's a lot of loose debris all over. The trees that act like a barricade to the strong winds, all the leaves are gone. Some of the trees have fallen, and the trees hold the hillsides. So if we have a lot of rain, we're going to have some erosion and potential mudslides. So that's a big concern.
Everyone here is doing all they can to prepare. More than 20,000 British citizens facing their second potentially devastating hurricane in as many weeks. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, on the British Virgin Islands.
Sorry about the strange thing that happened there to the pictures. Sally has joined us in the studio with all the business news. The focus on China.
Yes, absolutely. The world's second biggest economy has got our attention today. So it, of course, trails behind the US and could well become number one in the next decade. But as it stands, large chunks of the Chinese economy are off limits to foreigners because of restrictions over what they are allowed to own. But that is changing, with the Chinese government looking at how it can attract more investment from overseas. And that is what's behind an important meeting of China's central bank, which is taking place today. So that meeting of the People's Bank of China is looking at the financial services industry, which, as you can see behind me here, is worth around $40 trillion. It's one of the most valuable sectors of the economy for companies both inside and outside of China. UN figures suggest over the last few years there's been a growing trend of foreign direct investment in China. Last year, it was worth this much, $133.7 billion. Now, whilst the finance industry is still subject to some restrictions, many parts of the Chinese economy are open to foreign trade with little regulation. For example, there's 11 trial free trade zones dotted around the country. And some of the areas where China's government wants more investment from abroad include electric vehicle manufacturing, ship design, aircraft maintenance, the railways, for example. So there's a lot going on. And today, as I say, the People's Bank of China is discussing the issue of lifting the regulation on the financial markets even more. So we'll be talking about that in detail in World Business Report. Also, rumours are rife that the American toy giant Toys R Us could be announcing plans to file for bankruptcy imminently, according to many reports out there. The company's been hit by downgrades from credit rating agencies. It's struggling with around $400 million worth of debt. It's yet another example of the grim reality that traditional retailers, i.e. those that are on the high street, they're facing as they are shaken up by e-commerce competitors like Amazon. For example, in the toy industry, Amazon is just such a huge competitor for the likes of Toys R Us. It was founded in the post-World War II baby boom season, and it has been slipping for some time. The news caused shares on Wall Street to fall significantly. Suppliers to Toys R Us like Mattel, its shares fell more than 6% on the rumours. And the monopoly maker Hasbro, it lost some 2% of its value. We'll be keeping you right across this story. Any announcement, of course, from Toys R Us will let you know. There's a lot going on in business today, so I will hand you back to Chris, but I'll be back in around about 15 minutes. See you then. Yeah,
you've exhausted me just listening to you. Thanks, Sally. A busy day for the business team. As Sally said, more from her later. Also, Sally will be joining me for the news review. And all about Africa, we're going to meet the winner of the 2017 Comrade Duma Award for Journalism.
When I got the call, I can remember I was at work, and I can tell you that from that point, my life changed.
30 hours after the earthquake that devastated Mexico City, rescue teams still have no idea just how many people have died.
Well, there is people alive and there is people not alive.
We just can help and give whatever we got.
It looked as though they had come to fight a war, but their mission is to bring peace to East Timor, and nowhere on earth needs it more badly.
The government's case is being forcefully presented by Monsieur Badinter, the Justice Minister. He's campaigned vigorously for abolition, having once witnessed one of his clients being executed.
Elizabeth Seton spent much of her time at this grotto, and every year hundreds of pilgrimages are made here. Now that she's become a saint, it's expected that this area will be inundated with tourists. The mayor and local businessmen regard the anticipated boom as yet another blessing of St. Elizabeth.
This is BBC News. I'm Chris Rogers. Let's have a look at the latest headlines now. Myanmar is facing mounting pressure over the plight of Rohingya Muslims. In the last hour, the country's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, condemned human rights violations in Rakhine State and said she will allow the refugees to return. Hurricane Maria has made landfall in the eastern Caribbean. The Category 5 storm could cause catastrophic damage across the region. President Trump will be taking to the podium for his maiden address to the United Nations General Assembly later. The speech has been described by US Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, as delivering slaps and hugs to the right people. He's expected to also focus on North Korea and the Iranian nuclear deal. Barbara Pledusher reports from New York.
Another new US president making his debut at the United Nations. The last time this happened, there was anticipation. This time, it's more like trepidation, wariness of the man who's denounced the UN as utterly incompetent and has threatened to slash funding. But Mr. Trump's tone was more conciliatory than hectoring as he joined forces with the UN Secretary General to promote reform.
We commend the Secretary General and his call for the United Nations to focus more on people and less on bureaucracy.
And the Secretary General made a point of speaking language that Mr. Trump understood.
Our shared objective is a 21st century UN focused more on people, less on process. Value for money.
Perhaps more than any other president, Donald Trump has put the UN in his crosshairs. But at heart, he remains a New York businessman, a deal maker. And the UN is a place where deals are made. The U.S. has done a deal on North Korea at the Security Council, imposing the tightest ever sanctions. The continuing threat from its nuclear weapons will feature in the president's speech, as will harsh words for Iran's political leadership. But Mr. Trump will get little support here at the UN for his attempts to unravel that nuclear deal.
I was your guest at Bastille Day, and it was one of the greatest parades I've ever seen.
And an effusive meeting with the French president masked tensions over Mr. Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord, seen by many as putting America first at the expense of the planet. The president finished his first day at the UN basking in the glow of common agendas, a meeting with Latin American leaders to discuss the crisis in Venezuela. When he takes to the podium later today, he's expected to promote international cooperation, but on his nationalist terms. His central message will be to make the United Nations great, he said, riffing on his campaign theme. Not great again, just great. Barbara Platt-Usher, BBC News at the United Nations in New York.
Ryanair has published a full list of the flights being cancelled over the next 6 weeks, admitting It's messed up the planning of pilot holidays. Thousands of passengers were left stranded at the weekend, and the company is facing a compensation bill of more than $22 million, as Tom Burridge reports.
Ryanair has been anything but satisfying for the huge number of people whose flights have been cancelled. The budget airline has now published a full list on its website. More than 2,000 flights cancelled over the next 6 weeks.
Ryanair have cancelled 2 of our flights home now, which means we're stuck in Madrid. We've had to pay out hundreds of pounds extra to book another hotel and also extra flights to get back. And the communication from Ryanair has been absolutely atrocious. We don't even know why it's been cancelled. We're just really desperate to get home now.
Ryanair claims it made mistakes when allocating leave for its pilots. It says it will refund all passengers or rebook them onto other flights and pay compensation, particularly to those due to fly within the next 2 weeks.
When people are talking to Ryanair, we would expect that they are fully complying with all their legal duties, so they're really clear about the compensation you're owed, what expenses you'll get, and when you will actually get to fly.
Ryanair denies it has a shortage of pilots after some left to join its rival Norwegian. Ryanair flies more people around Europe than any other airline, but it has more unhappy customers now. Tom Burridge, BBC News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is attending the next stage of Zapad, the fictitious war games that are part of a large-scale joint military exercise with Belarus, and one of the biggest since Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg is in northern Russia.
Well, here in northern Russia, the Russian army is under attack from so-called illegal armed groups, and the Russians are hitting back with all they've got, with the Air Force, with artillery and with infantry. This is a huge military exercise, codenamed Zapad 2017. Zapad means west. It's an exercise which happens every 4 years, a joint manoeuvre between Russia and Belarus. Today, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, attended the exercise, and he's been monitoring the war game from the command post. Now, Russia insists that this exercise is all about defence, not attack, and certainly not a prelude to an invasion of Europe. But with Russia and NATO locked into what feels like a new Cold War, certainly in the West, there's a lot of suspicion about Russia's intentions, and certainly governments in the Baltic states are concerned about these military exercises. There was even some speculation that Moscow might try to use them as cover to move extra equipment into Belarus. The Russians deny that. There's also a difference of opinion about the numbers of troops involved. Russia insists that there are no more than 13,000 soldiers taking part in this exercise. NATO believes that the number is much higher than that. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, in northern Russia.
The BBC can reveal the winner of the 2017 Komladuma Award for African Journalists that recognises talent from across the African continent. This year's winner is Amina Yaguda, a reporter and presenter from Yola in northern Nigeria. Now, according to the judges, she stood out from the crowd because of her superb storytelling. Amina tells us a bit more about herself now.
When I got the call, I can remember I was at work, and I can tell you that from that point, my life changed. And I just kept pacing up and down. Everyone around me knew something was up. But, you know, I was so excited. I couldn't even say anything to anyone. I just kept, moving. I was restless. I walked out of my office. I screamed. I had to, I had to let it out of me somehow. I was screaming, and then I called my mum. That was the first thing I did. I called my mum, and, she was also so happy. She was screaming. It was just, I'm surprised I didn't get a heart attack at that point because I was so excited. I've never been that happy my whole life. Who else has a story idea for us to cover today? I think it was destined for me to be a journalist because from my earliest memories about myself, I've been always very curious and inquisitive. In fact, one of the first words I learned, age 5, was the word inquisitive. And this was because I kept on asking my mom questions, and she'd say to me, "Oh, you're so inquisitive." And I asked again, "What's the meaning of inquisitive?" I think it's part of my character. It was just a beautiful experience for me the first time. I got this thrill, you know, being on air the first time. I'm sort of introverted naturally, but I found that when I was in front of the camera, I just, you know, lost all of my reservations. I became another person in front of the camera. There are lots of challenges, and for me, the major one I notice is me being a woman, being female in the North, because we are sort of conservative. So sometimes I've had people say to me, well, you know, you shouldn't be so much in the public eye. Some people think, well, I don't want to take orders from a woman. I still get a lot of that. And sometimes some people would not want to work with you because you're a woman, and they think, oh, well, I know better than she does. You know, so I think in the day-to-day business of journalism for me, it's mostly that people underestimate me, but I always prove them wrong.
Well, coming up, we've got the latest business news, and Sally will be joining me for the news review, looking at stories and how they're being covered around the world by other news organisations. Don't go away.
Well, Tuesday promises to be the better day of the working week. We've got a ridge of high pressure building in, so things look quieter. It's a chilly start again, mind you. Towns and city temperatures 8 to 10 degrees, much lower than this in the countryside. This is the weather front which brought the overnight rain. That's eventually clearing off, but it could leave a few showers across the southeast to start the morning. Elsewhere, though, it's a chilly start, clear skies, some mist and fog around too. Some of it could be quite dense through Cheshire into the West Midlands and across central southern areas. Temperatures starting off at around 9 to 11 degrees for many. There will be plenty of sunshine, light winds from the northwest. As you can see, the map lit up golden with all that sunshine, even as far north as up to Scotland as well. A little bit of sunshine across eastern parts of Northern Ireland, but cloud thickening up across the west. That's because we've got this weather front making inroads off the Atlantic gradually through the day. Elsewhere, sunshine will persist through the morning. Temperatures will rise. There'll be a little bit of cloud just bubbling up here and there, maybe an isolated shower, but most places should stay dry. And because of the light winds and the strong sunshine, we'll see high 17 or 18 degrees. But the clouds will continue to thicken up across Northern Ireland ahead of this weather front, which will move in. You can see tightly packed isobars, so it turns windier across western areas. We lose our ridge of high pressure. But what it is doing is pulling up some mild air from the south. So things are going to be getting a little bit warmer as the week wears on, particularly where you get the sunshine. And for Wednesday, it's the eastern half of the country which will fare best, better sunshine and feel quite warm too. But across the west, weather system we're moving in, bringing some pretty heavy rain to parts of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, into Wales and the southwest of England. 16 to 19 degrees. On Thursday, that weather front slowly moves its way eastwards. You could see quite a lot of rain falling in places, especially the southwest in towards Wales, southwestern parts of Scotland too, but quite warm and sunny again across the southeast. Let's just pull out and head across the Atlantic though to the major hurricane which is battering the Caribbean at the moment. Hurricane Maria is a major hurricane around category 4, ploughing through parts of the Leeward Isles, and it has its eyes set on Puerto Rico and again the Virgin Islands as we reach Wednesday.
Today, President Trump fulfilled one of his key election pledges.
James Comey told senators at a blockbuster hearing that Donald Trump lied about his firing.
They're calling it the Brexit election.
Does your wife manage to stop you tweeting, Christian, at weekends?
No. This is a much more dangerous world. It got more dangerous yesterday.
Making sense of the stories shaping our world.
There must be some sort of strategy, you would think.
Beyond 100 Days, Monday to Thursdays at 7 on the BBC News Channel.
Outside Source doesn't just report a story, it looks at it from every angle. Live data visualizations help us understand what's happening and what it means. Interactive maps take you from a global view right down to street level. Real-time reporting and reaction from social media means you get the latest as we do. And the BBC's unparalleled global expertise allows us to reality check the biggest stories.
News for a digital world, Outside Source, with me, Ros Atkins.
Tonight at 9 on the BBC News Channel.
We are family. I got all my sisters with me. Hi, I'm Nile Rodgers, and over the years I've had lots of hits.
He listens to a track and he goes, what's the right thing to do? It's like a good caring mother.
In this 3-part series, I'm going to tell you how to survive the music business, how to make it, how to keep it, and if you lose it, how to get it back.
Nile Rodgers.